The screen fades in with tense music, a wide shot of a dusty Texas highway, the kind where trouble always seems to find the wrong man, and just then, the narrator speaks with a sharp hook. Imagine a cop walking up to a man he thinks is just another old guy. Until that man turns around and the entire world changes. A cop hit Chuck Norris, but what happened next left everyone speechless. Welcome back to Smile and Scars, the channel where real legends walk among us, and every story comes with a twist. Get ready, because today's story will leave you stunned. It all began on a quiet afternoon in the small town of Redwood, a place where tumbleweeds rolled lazily across the streets and everyone knew everyone. Well, almost everyone, because on this particular day, a stranger had walked into that town, a stranger with calm eyes, a steady walk, and a presence that made even the air hesitate. Chuck Norris had arrived. But Chuck wasn't there to fight anyone or show off. He was simply traveling through the state on his way to visit an old friend. After hours of driving, he pulled over at a small roadside diner called Sandy's Grill, hoping for nothing more than a quiet meal, a strong cup of coffee, and maybe 10 minutes of peace. Inside the diner, the scene was ordinary. A couple of truckers at one booth, a family with loud kids at another, the old jukebox humming some country song from the 80s. Chuck walked in and took a seat near the window, blending in like he always did. Despite being a living legend, he smiled humbly at the waitress, who nearly dropped her notepad when she realized who he was. But outside that diner, something else was unfolding. Two cops sat in their cruiser a few yards away. Officer Briggs, a tall man with a short temper, and Officer Delaney, younger, quieter, and constantly forced to follow Briggs' lead. Briggs slammed his energy drink shut and glared toward the diner. "That guy again," Briggs muttered. Delaney squinted. "Who?" "The old man with the beard. He was parked at the gas station earlier. Didn't like the look of him." Delaney raised a brow. "So, an old man getting gas is suspicious." Briggs scoffed. "You're new here, kid. You don't learn to trust your gut, you'll get walked all over." Delaney didn't respond. He'd been on the job long enough to know that Briggs' gut wasn't exactly trustworthy. Still, the older cop stepped out of the cruiser, hand already near his baton, scanning the area like he was hunting for trouble. Inside the diner, Chuck quietly cut into his steak. He didn't look up when the bell over the door chimed, but he already knew someone was approaching. Briggs marched straight toward him with the swagger of a man who believed he controlled the world. "Hey," Briggs barked. "You." Chuck calmly lifted his gaze. "Afternoon, officer." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "ID now." Chuck blinked slowly. "May I ask why?" "That truck outside looks suspicious, and we don't appreciate strangers wandering around our town without telling us." Chuck's voice remained steady. "I'm just stopping for lunch, nothing more." But Briggs hated being told no, hated not being feared, and the calmness in Chuck's tone only made him angrier. "You think you're funny?" Briggs snapped. Delaney stepped in. "Briggs, come on, he's just eating." Briggs waved him off. "Quiet, rookie." He grabbed Chuck's shoulder, and that was the moment. Chuck didn't move. He didn't tense. He simply watched the officer's hand like a parent watching a child make a mistake. But Briggs took that stillness as disrespect. He leaned in closer. "Get up, now." Chuck sighed softly. "Officer, you don't want to do this. I'll decide what I want." And before anyone could blink, Briggs shoved Chuck's shoulder aggressively. The diner fell absolutely silent. The waitress froze. The family turned to stare. Even the jukebox seemed to hesitate. Briggs puffed up his chest. "What's wrong? Cat got your..." Then it happened. Briggs slapped Chuck Norris across the face. A crisp, echoing smack that made everyone gasp. Chuck didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even sway, but the moment Briggs pulled his hand back, a cold silence filled the entire room. Delaney's jaw dropped. He whispered, oh no, you have no idea who." Briggs cut him off. "Shut up, rookie. I can handle a senior citizen." Chuck slowly placed his fork down and wiped his mouth with a napkin. Not angry, not offended, just disappointed. "Officer," Chuck finally said, "for your sake, and for this town's sake, you need to take a breath, step back, and rethink your actions." Briggs slammed his palm on the table. Or what? Chuck leaned back, calm, patient. Things will go badly, very badly. The older cop sneered, grabbed Chuck by the collar, and yanked him up. Delaney's heart nearly stopped. Briggs, that's Chuck Norris. Briggs froze. What? He whispered. That's the Chuck Norris. Briggs looked back at Chuck, really looked this time, and the color drained from his face. Every story he'd heard, every joke, every legend, all suddenly became very real. But it was too late. Chuck stood up fully now, towering not in height but in presence. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Chuck took a single step forward. Briggs stumbled back, tripping over his own boots. Look, I didn't mean," Chuck shook his head. "You hit a man without reason. You abused your authority. Worse, you tried to intimidate someone who only wanted peace." Briggs swallowed hard, sweating. "Now," Chuck continued, "I don't hit people. Not unless there's no other choice." Briggs' voice cracked. There's another choice. Right. Chuck stared at him. That alone made Briggs fall silent. Delaney spoke, trembling. "Mr. Norris, please." He didn't know. Chuck nodded. "I know." Then he turned away. But Briggs' pride couldn't handle being humbled in front of a whole diner. He grabbed his baton and raised it. Big mistake. The baton swung toward Chuck's back, but Chuck moved like lightning. His hand shot behind him, catching the baton midair without even turning around. Briggs froze, eyes wide in horror. Chuck slowly turned his head. "Don't," he said quietly. Briggs tried to pull the baton back, but Chuck didn't even budge. It was like trying to move a mountain. Chuck flicked his wrist gently, and the baton flew across the room, embedding itself into the wooden wall like a knife. Gasps filled the diner. Briggs fell backwards. Delaney whispered, "Sir, please, just walk away." Chuck sighed. "I tried." He stepped forward, and Briggs scrambled back on the floor like a frightened child. Chuck leaned down slightly. "Here's the lesson, officer. Strength is not in how hard you hit. It's in how you treat people. You forgot that today." The room remained silent. Then Chuck walked past him, past Delaney, and toward the exit. As he pushed open the door, Briggs shouted desperately, "Wait, is that it? You're just leaving?" Chuck paused, turned, and said the words that would haunt Briggs forever. "I don't fight men who are already defeated." Chuck walked out. The bell chimed. The legend had left the building, but that was not the end, because just when Briggs thought the humiliation was over, something happened outside the diner that would flip the entire story upside down. Something that would test Chuck Norris, the cops, and the whole town in a way no one expected. The sun outside the diner hung low, casting long shadows across the dusty parking lot. Chuck Norris stepped out, taking a quiet breath, ready to continue his journey. But the universe wasn't done with him. Not yet. Inside, Officer Briggs struggled to stand. His pride was shattered, his uniform stained with dust, and his mind racing with panic. People had recorded the whole scene. His reputation was gone, and the worst part, he knew he deserved every bit of it. Delaney helped him up. "Briggs, just let it go." But Briggs wasn't listening. His heart pounded with humiliation and anger. "He made a fool out of me," he whispered harshly, in front of everyone. Delaney shook his head. "You made a fool of yourself." Those words hit harder than any punch. Meanwhile, Chuck walked toward his truck, the peaceful silence of the road returning. He thought the situation was over, resolved, closed, but trouble had a different plan. A loud engine roared in the distance. Tires screeched. A black pickup truck sped recklessly into the parking lot, kicking dust into the air. 3 figures jumped out, 2 men and 1 woman, all looking distressed. The driver rushed toward Chuck. "Sir, please, you gotta help us," he cried. Chuck glanced at the injured looking man gripping his arm. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. "What happened?" Chuck asked calmly. The man pointed behind him, voice trembling. "My little sister. She's inside the truck. She's not breathing. We were speeding to the hospital, but the engine blew out. Please, sir, anyone, help us." Chuck nodded without hesitation. "Take me to her." Back inside the diner, Briggs stepped toward the window. What now? He squinted, watching the frantic group. Delaney rushed beside him, looked serious. Briggs watched Chuck kneel beside the truck. Something twisted inside him, a mix of confusion, shame, and curiosity. Chuck opened the passenger door of the truck. A teenage girl lay slumped in the seat, her face pale, breath shallow, sweat glistening on her forehead. Her brother spoke quickly. "She passed out 10 minutes ago. I don't know what's wrong. Please." Chuck placed gentle fingers on her neck. He felt a rapid but weakening pulse. "She's dehydrated," Chuck said, voice steady. "Heat exhaustion, maybe heat stroke." He looked up. "She needs to cool down fast and get to a hospital." Delaney ran out of the diner. "We can call for an ambulance." Briggs followed slowly, unsure, still battling with embarrassment. Chuck lifted the girl carefully in his arms. "No time. She needs shade and water now." The girl's head rolled against his chest. Chuck moved with urgency, carrying her toward the diner's shaded side. Inside, the customers watched in awe. That's Chuck Norris, saving a kid. Chuck laid the girl on a bench, instructing her brother and sister to lift her legs slightly to improve circulation. He dampened napkins with cool water, placing them gently on her head and neck. "Stay with me," Chuck whispered to the girl. "You're strong. You're going to be fine." Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Briggs watched, guilt heavy on his shoulders. How could he have treated a man like this? The same man who was now fighting to save a stranger's life. Delaney nudged Briggs urgently. "See, that's real strength, not shouting, not intimidation. This." Briggs swallowed hard. I know." Chuck turned. "Officer Delaney, call for an ambulance. Tell them it's a heat stroke emergency." "Yes, sir." Delaney sprinted to his radio. Briggs hesitated, then approached slowly. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked softly, voice lacking its former arrogance. Chuck didn't look up. "Yes, bring cool towels, more water, and ice if the diner has any." Briggs nodded quickly. For the first time, he followed orders without question. Minutes passed in tense silence. Chuck worked swiftly, cooling the girl's skin, checking her pulse, keeping her conscious. Her breath slowly improved. Color returned faintly to her cheeks. Her brother sobbed in relief. "Sir, thank you so much." Chuck gave him a small nod. "Family is everything. Don't ever take that for granted." Briggs returned with everything he could find: ice, towels, bottles of water. "Here," he said quietly. Chuck glanced up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the slap. Briggs' voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The word hung in the air like a fragile truth finally freed. Chuck stared at him for several seconds, long enough for Briggs to feel every mistake he'd made that day. Then Chuck spoke, gentle but firm. "An apology means nothing unless your behavior changes." Briggs nodded, eyes glassy. "It will, I swear." The ambulance sirens echoed down the road. Paramedics rushed out, taking the girl onto a stretcher. One paramedic glanced at Chuck and smiled in recognition. "You again. Looks like you saved another one." Chuck shrugged lightly, just lending a hand. The girl's hand reached weakly toward him. Chuck held it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome. Stay strong." As the ambulance pulled away, Delaney approached with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Norris, you really saved her." Chuck looked at him kindly. "You did your part too. You listened. That's important." Then Chuck turned to Briggs. The officer felt his heart pound. I messed up, badly." Chuck nodded slowly. "Yes, but you realized it, and you tried to fix it. That matters." Briggs took a shaky breath. "I want to be better, a better cop, a better human." Chuck rested a hand on his shoulder, not with force, but with reassurance. "Then start now." Briggs exhaled a deep, trembling breath. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Chuck smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves at least one." The officer stepped back as Chuck walked toward his truck, ready to leave the town behind. But before he opened the door, Briggs called out softly, "Sir, why didn't you hit me back?" Chuck looked over his shoulder. "Because the world already punishes those who abuse power. My job is to protect people, even from themselves." Briggs lowered his head. Chuck continued, voice calm and wise. "Violence doesn't make you strong. Compassion does, remember that." Briggs nodded slowly. He would never forget that lesson. Chuck climbed into his truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the open road. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the asphalt. As he drove away, One truth settled over everyone who had witnessed the events of that day. A cop hit Chuck Norris. But what Chuck did next didn't just shock everyone, it changed lives. And that is the story for Smile and Scars, where legends teach us lessons, not with fists, but with heart. The camera fades out.